There's a large interest in Germany, especially among our viewers, on the case of Edward Snowden. In case you know, how is he holding up in Moscow during this time with the coronavirus? And also, given that Bernie is out of contention, do you think the situation will change under Biden or Trump regarding his exile?
So Snowden is doing great. I actually have been joking around with him a lot. He made a tweet along these lines as well at the beginning of all this, where I think he tweeted something like social distancing is underrated, because he's always been, even before he became the famous Ed Snowden, somebody who was generally on the computer a lot, who wasn't he's not exactly an extrovert. He never really went out of his house all that often. I don't want to say he's a recluse, because he's not. He's very likable but his inclination is to keep to himself and stay at home. Obviously, that's how he learned coding and programming and computer science. So I think he's coping really well. He's married now to his girlfriend. They live together in Moscow. The last time I visited him was a stark contrast to the first time, when everything was cloak and dagger and very tense. The last time I visited him, we were able to walk on the streets of Moscow, go to Gorky Park, have dinner at restaurants. He got recognized a few times, but nothing obtrusive. So I think he has a comfortable, stable life there. When I went to Moscow the last time, I actually talked to Russian government officials and members of the Russian media, including ones who are opposed to Vladimir Putin, about the possibility, especially given what had been alleged to be the close relationship between Trump and Putin, that Trump could succeed in extracting an agreement whereby the Russians would hand Snowden over to the US. And what I heard was something that I had been hearing for years, which is that it would almost be politically impossible for Putin to do that, because the idea of giving refuge to dissidents from the West is really ingrained in Russian culture and identity. It's something that the Russians have done for decades. So to hand him over would be a very un-Russian thing to do. So I can't predict the future. Who knows how long Putin will last? Who knows how long the U.S. government and Russia will continue to have the animosity and adversity that they have had for decades between them. But it seems to me, for the short term, certainly, and probably the midterm, Snowden's situation in Russia is safe. Obviously, he shouldn't need asylum, because he shouldn't be in a position where his own government is trying to imprison him for giving journalists information that was treated responsibly and was clearly in the public interest. But that is his reality. And so I think his asylum is more or less stable for the foreseeable future.
Getting back to our system, Glenn, I've always wondered why so many parts of the population are not engaged politically. For example, in the US, I think around 40% of the population doesn't vote. In Germany, I think it's around 20 to 30%. And it's political activism, or the consumption of information, is for many people abstract or highly depressing, let alone informing themselves about issues such as press freedom, whistleblowing, foreign policy, imperialism, etc. I've also read that when people are under a lot of stress for a prolonged period of time, their impulsive and emotional centers take over their critical faculties, impairing logical decision-making processes needed for a democracy. I think as long as people will struggle to make ends meet, they will be stressed, impairing political engagement generally. With that context, what do you think of a universal income as a concept? If people don't worry about food, rent, electricity, and can voluntarily choose where to work, what to pursue, have you ever thought about a universal basic income? And if yes, what is your general opinion about that?
Well, I think it's interesting. I think that for all the suffering and misery and death and tumult that this pandemic is bringing to the entire world, there are also opportunities that it is presenting because of the unraveling of a lot of the certainties that people had, and the radical changes being ushered in for our society is making people open to possibilities that 3 months ago or 4 months ago they didn't even think was possible, let alone things that they were willing to support. So, I just interviewed I have a new YouTube program, and interviewed 2 specialists in depression and mental health about the effects of isolation and quarantine and social distancing on our mental health. And one of them was emphasizing that it's hard to imagine how you can continue to ask people to stay in their homes, to maintain social distancing without providing universal income. Because people, if they're forced to choose between having their family starve to death or leaving the house and risking infection, they're going to choose the latter. And to watch a lot of countries, including the US, even just as inadequate as it was, this $1,200 check that the government just sent to people for no reason, which is a form of universal income, in an aggressively capitalist country, I think highlights this sense of opportunity. I do think that we all suffer individually and collectively by having people in our society who can't even afford basic sustenance for their family. I know here in Brazil, there are hundreds of millions of people, or tens of millions at least, for whom that's true. And it creates social instability aside from the morality of it. It generates lots of crime. It generates a huge amount of lost talent from kids who are very talented and smart, but who can't go finish school, let alone go to college or graduate school because they can't afford it, because they have to work, because they drop out of school, because their culture teaches them that there are other ways to make money. It creates all kinds of social pathologies. And I think the opportunity that we now have, where we're being forced to stay at home, where socialist solutions, even capitalist countries, are being turned to as a means of addressing the pandemic, where we're likely to be isolated in some form or another, or socially distanced in some form or another, not for more weeks, but for months, if not longer. I think the opportunity is greater than ever, at least in our lifetime, for proposals like universal income to be advocated in an effective way. And I absolutely believe that this pandemic is changing our sense of the collective and the individual. We're seeing that we're all linked together, that we all, no matter how safe we feel in our lives, can have the social order and our own lives unravel really quickly. And to kind of do a high wire act without a net, which is what you're doing and how you're living if you live in a society without a serious social safety net, is a lot scarier for a lot of people than it was, say, 3 months ago when we all thought our privilege would last forever. And we now see that it's by no means guaranteed.
Pure journalism. Every journalist in the world should have been cheering Edward Snowden. He did what every journalist is supposed to be devoted to.
Because we have evidence that when we do that, things go wrong.